The ceiling fans thumped as my uncle's laughter cut me down in front of the hall. I'm Elias Mercer in my 50s, a facilities director. The pocket watch in my blazer pressed against my palm, steady as breath. When the room goes quiet after the joke, what do you hold on to? The brisket smoke clung to my jacket, as if the whole hall wanted me to carry it home. Plates scraped forks, tapped, and the ceiling fans groaned overhead, pushing damp heat down onto our long table. I could feel the watch in my pocket, its weight small but solid, the way a stone in your shoe keeps reminding you it's there. The jokes started easy about barbecue portions and old football games, but they drifted toward me like smoke curling into a corner. Uncle Frank leaned back, beer half raised his laugh big enough to rattle the domino tiles at the next table. "He's just a dropout," he boomed, and a few cousins chuckled because they weren't sure what else to do. I smiled thinly and traced the condensation crawling down the iced tea pitcher. The glass left a wet ring on the paper placemat, smudging the anchor printed there. Michael smirked 2 seats down, jaw tight, like he'd rehearsed the expression. Lauren sat quiet, hands folded, her smile too polite to mean anything. "Pathetic soldier," Uncle said, louder testing if the room would laugh with him. The fans thumped. A fork clattered, bounced once, and stayed still. My throat tightened, but I stayed in my chair, watch pressing warm against my palm through the fabric. That was when the general moved. His glass touched the table with a deliberate sound, small, but the hall obeyed. He stood uniform, straight shoulders squared beneath the flags hanging crooked behind the stage. "Mr. Mercer," he said, his voice carrying past the bingo boards with respect. He turned to me, eyes steady. "You'll lead." The room froze. Laughter shriveled into silence. The guitarist in the corner set down his pick. My uncle's grin slipped fork midair. I rose because that's what the moment asked, chair legs scraping against tile. "Yes, sir." The general nodded once and sat again, nothing more dramatic than truth spoken aloud. The quiet that followed belonged to me. I looked down the table faces, blank, some uneasy, some avoiding my eyes. My father's brother, the loudest man in Wharton, found no more words. The watch in my pocket seemed to hum with the air conditioner's rattle, steady, unbroken. If you want to know how we reached this table, why a general would stand, and why an uncle would fall quiet, you have to look back. Not far, just enough to see the ground it grew from. The smell of burned toast, mixed with motor oil, drifted from the garage into the kitchen, the way it always did on mornings my father left the door cracked. I sat at the table, hands wrapped around a mug too hot to drink. The paper lay folded in half beside the butter dish headline, "Visible Mercer's Dropout Kid Honored." The question mark was heavier than the words. Frank rattled the pages like he was airing them out. "Big type for small news," he muttered. Michael grinned across the table, basking as if the story were about him. Lauren offered to refill his coffee before I could answer. My words hung back in my throat like they'd learned not to interrupt. "Give him credit," Michael said finally, flashing his practiced half-smile. "Office work suits him better than mud and sweat." He looked at me when he said it, but his tone was pitched toward our father. Frank nodded, already reaching for the jelly jar. False support, dressed like kindness. I'd worn it all my life. I scrolled my phone under the table thumb, smearing a smudge across the glass. The local site had picked up the photo from last night, me half-in-frame, uniform collar, just visible General Gaines in crisp salute. Comments stacked below, "Paper soldier." Must have been charity. Looks staged. The words flickered in blue light, each one landing heavier than the last. The chatter at the table turned back to Michael. New client, big accounts, maybe a promotion. Laughter moved around me like a current skipping the chair where I sat. I stared at the black ring of coffee at the bottom of my cup, imagining it spreading wider, drowning the print on the paper. I tightened my grip until the mug's handle bit into my palm. Michael caught my eye and smirked as if to say he'd thrown me a lifeline and I hadn't grabbed it. My vow was silent, but sharp. I would prove worth in ways no headline could question. The old clock on the wall ticked louder than their voices for a beat. Then my phone buzzed, screen lighting up again. Subject, project, reassignment, effective immediately. Rain stitched the evening into long gray lines across the loading yard, the kind of steady Houston shower that polished everything without cooling the air. I stood under the corrugated overhang, reading the email again to make sure the words hadn't shifted while I blinked. Logistics reassignment, effective immediately. It had the weight of a rubber stamp and the sound of a door clicking shut. Somewhere behind me, a pallet jack squealed metal on concrete, and a forklift backed up with the tired, apologetic beep you stop hearing after a decade. My boots were wet enough that they squeaked when I stepped inside, each step a small admission that tonight didn't belong to me. The operations floor smelled like printer toner and lemon cleaner. Someone had taped a motivational poster to the far wall months ago, hands clasped in a circle. A caption about synergy and water from an AC drip had smudged the ink so the hands bled together. I signed the HR form without commentary, sliding it back to the clerk who kept her eyes on her keyboard like politeness was a task on her queue. On the walk to my desk, I passed the whiteboard where I'd traced shipping lanes and backup routes. My neat arrows were still there, but someone had drawn a box over my name, then a line through the box. Efficiency done in dry erase. I cleaned the last of my personal files from the shared drive, not because anyone asked, but because not leaving crumbs is a kind of courtesy. When the screensaver rolled over to a company logo I no longer should have been proud of, I locked the system and slipped my pocket watch out to check the time. A minute fast. The cracked glass caught the fluorescent light and made a small star on my palm. I closed my fingers around it and felt steadier. On the way out, the evening pressed its damp hand to my face. Rain funneled off the roof in a thin sheet I had to shoulder through. The parking lot lights smeared yellow over puddles stamped with tire tracks. I drove without turning on the radio, the wipers ticking their metronome until the low brick of the VFW hall rose out of the wet like a tugboat in fog. Inside, the air held layers, floor wax, fryer oil, gone a little sweet cigar smoke, with edges sanded down by time. Earl, the post commander, stood by the bulletin board pinning up a flyer about a fish fry. He tipped his head at me. "You look like a man who could use a dry chair." "I'll take 2, I said. He chuckled and nodded toward the back. "Gaines is around. Said he might catch the game." The bar TV muttered sports highlights with the sound off. Captain Robert Gaines wasn't watching. He was studying the framed black and white photographs on the wall like they were a set of orders. He still had the posture of a man who believed in straight lines and promised follow-through. Civilian clothes, yes. Dark shirt sleeves neat, but nothing about him sat casual. "Evening, Captain," I said. "Eli." He didn't ask how I was. He took one look at the damp shoulders of my jacket and the way I held my jaw and said, "Walk with me." We went down the short hallway past the bingo boards to a side room that smelled like varnish and ghosts of meetings, coffee paper, pipe ash that never quite leaves. Rain drummed a light, meticulous rhythm on the flat roof. The door clicked behind us soft. "Reassigned?" he asked. "Effective immediately." I tried for a shrug and made it halfway. "Less mud, more paperwork. You know, office boy in uniform." Gaines rested his knuckles on the back of a folding chair, then straightened it, even though it didn't need straightening. His eyes did that thing I'd come to recognize, taking a measure not of the facts, but of the person held up against them. "Not quitting is a choice," he said, like he was teeing up a familiar drill. "But so is deciding where you aim your quiet." I exhaled through my nose. "Quiet is what I've got left." "Quiet is a tool," he said. "Silence is a discipline. They are not the same, and neither is surrender." He reached into his breast pocket and brought out a small black notebook. It was ordinary, the kind you can buy at any drugstore elastic band snug around its belly. He laid it on the table between us, the way a man lays a map. I didn't move for a second. The room hummed the old soda machine sighing in the corner, the AC clicking into a lower gear. Somewhere in the main hall a chair leg scraped, and a voice called out a bingo number. Outside, the rain kept up its even handwriting. "Keep a ledger," Gaines said. "Not of grudges, of facts. Dates, times who said what, who signed what you saw, what you can prove someone else saw. If you've got to speak, let paper speak for you. It doesn't shake." "I've kept scraps," I said. "Emails, memos, things that didn't add up." "Scraps are for birds," he said gently. "You need a machine. A truth engine, built slow, fed properly." I thumbed the edge of the notebook and let the elastic band snap light against my skin. They moved me off logistics lanes I designed, gave the new contract to Michael's team. He didn't blink at the name. "Family is the closest battlefield without bullets." He said it as if he were stating whether not dispensing comfort. "What do the bylaws say about reassignments?" "Vague," I said. "Intentionally." "Then clarity will be your weapon." He drew a small square on the blank table with his finger in visible ink. "Board minutes, procurement trail, who approved which route and when. If they box you out, track the box." I shifted my weight, wet boots chirping on the polished floor. "You sound like you already know the board's game." "I don't need to know the game to know the players," he said. A ghost of a smile. "And some of them like shiny things, numbers that look good on slides. They forget supply lines are made of people, not arrows." I thought of the whiteboard at the office and the neat rectangle drawn around my name, as if a magician had kept a trick from working by enclosing it. "You'll be tempted to argue at the table," he went on. "Don't. Not yet. You build. Quietly. There's time between a move and a countermove where most men spend their anger and call it action. Don't spend yours there." Rain slowed less stitching, more dots. I took the notebook and weighed it in my hand. Light but not empty. My pocket watch sat in my other hand, smooth from years of worry. I pressed the two together, the cracked glass kissing the notebook's cover, and something inside lined up not a plan yet, but the appetite for one. "Earl says there's fish fry next Friday," I said, "because small talk is sometimes the bridge to big decisions. Then you'll have a deadline." Gaines's eyes softened a fraction. "Eli, I don't care if they put you at the front of the line or the back door. The work is the same. Make sure the truth is ready when the room finally needs it." A door banged softly out in the hall. Laughter floated back a couple notes harmless. I slid the notebook into my inside pocket, feeling for the watch as I did, and seating them together side by side like two teeth meshing in a gear. What happens when the room doesn't want the truth, I asked. Rooms aren't people, he said. Rooms change when the light does. He stepped aside, giving me the path to the door. When I pulled it open, the TV out front had found a highlight package and turned up the sound. A burst of crowd noise rolled down the hall like warm air. Earl waved a hand without looking up from a jar of raffle tickets. On the corkboard, a new notice had been pinned while we talked special board session, attendance required. The ink was still glossy. I felt the tug of my phone even before it buzzed. The company banner glowed across the screen, crisp and neutral like a dentist's smile. Corporate memo. Urgent board meeting. Tomorrow, 9:00 a.m. The subject line kept breathing in and out with the lock screen light alive and patient. "Looks like the light found your room," Gaines said. I nodded, throat dry as old chalk. "Then I'd better bring matches." He squeezed my shoulder once the way you do when words would only make something smaller. "Bring paper," he said, "and let it speak." Outside, the rain had thinned to a mist that floated instead of falling. Puddles still held the neon from the bar sign, a red scribble trembling with each ripple. When I stepped into the night, my boots chirped once on the concrete, and I didn't wince at the sound. The notebook pressed warm against my ribs. In the truck, I wiped the fog off the inside of the windshield with my sleeve and set the watch on the dash. The second hand ticked steady. The memo waited patient like a sealed envelope that already knows what it contains. The engine turned over. In the mirror, the hall windows glowed square and ordinary. I watched one count of the watch, then another, then slid the truck into gear. The road out of the lot shone black and clean, freshly written. The boardroom lights burned white against polished wood, making every flaw in the grain stand out. I sat 2 chairs from the end jacket tight at the shoulder's patch seam inside my pocket, beginning to unravel. My thumb traced the loose thread, as if the cloth knew what was coming. Michael stood at the head of the table, tie-centered slides glowing behind him. His voice carried cleanly numbers flowing like water down a smooth channel. He pointed to a chart, $5 million in projected savings highlighted in green. Heads around the table nodded. Father clapped once softly, but enough to signal approval. I cleared my throat. "The route projections don't account for storage fees in Galveston. The margin. Already addressed." Michael cut in, smile tight. The chairman adjusted his glasses without looking at me. A pen clicked, then another. My words fell into a carpet already swallowing too many voices. The waitress wheeled in coffee, and I reached without thinking. The paper cup buckled, hot liquid spilling across my blazer. It ran straight to the pocket where the old watch rested. I felt the fabric darken heat seeping through and knew the stain would stay. I dabbed at it with a napkin, but the damage was done. Prop cracked as surely as if someone had dropped porcelain. Applause rippled as the contract was announced, awarded to Michael's team. My objections hadn't even left a footprint. Father rose to clap his back, pride written in bold across his face. I sat still, burning from the inside out, silent enough to hear the AC hum. My fingers found the notebook Gaines had given me, edges sharp against my palm. "Paper doesn't shake," he'd said. Later in the empty corridor, I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked at the subject line, "Evidence packet send later." I scheduled the email 9:00 a.m., Friday, and closed the lid with a click that echoed louder than applause. The apartment was quiet, except for the fridge's steady hum. a low mechanical heartbeat filling the midnight air. I set the lamp on low light, pooling yellow across the clutter of receipts and memos spread over the table. The air smelled faintly of dust and burnt coffee from the pot I'd abandoned hours ago. The patch in my pocket was stiff-stained dark from the spill in the boardroom, the seam still rough under my thumb. Broken, but not gone. I scrolled through folder after folder, emails marked urgent but long-forgotten meeting minutes, tucked away in corners of the shared drive expense reports with numbers that never added, years of disregard, each line a thread. Together, they formed a net. I typed slowly, pulling attachments into one message, the subject line blinking like a dare. If I'm gone, this speaks. From a flash drive, I slid a clip, the grainy security camera still timestamp glowing in the corner. Michael leaning in too close to a vendor handshake caught on film envelope exchanged. It wasn't dramatic, but truth rarely is. I watched it once, twice, then dropped it into the folder. Paper doesn't shake. Pixels don't lie. The glow of the laptop screen cast the room in cold light. Shadows of receipts climbed the wall like brittle ivy. I could hear Gaines's voice from that night at the VFW. Don't waste silence. My chest tightened. This wasn't silence wasted. It was silence sharpened. I hovered over the button finger pressed just long enough to feel the weight of choice. Then I clicked Schedule Send. The countdown clock appeared small digits pulsing. 9 a.m. Friday. No turning back. For a moment the hum of the fridge, the tick of the wall clock, and the faint whir of the laptop fan braided into one sound steady and sure. My hand brushed the patch through the fabric, the stain cool now, a reminder of what was already broken. The phone on the table buzzed against the wood, rattling the stack of papers. A new message lit the screen. Urgent board hearing. Tomorrow. Attendance required. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead too bright for the paneled room. They made the polished table shine like a courtroom bench. My chair felt small under the weight of so many eyes. Reporters filled the back row cameras, red-dotted already live. A banner on the intranet scrolled across a laptop screen near the door, company-wide session special hearing in progress. Michael stood at the head of the table, sleeves, crisp tie, perfect voice smooth. We've all seen the gaps, he said, pointing toward me, as though I were a bullet point on his slide. These errors are liabilities. Logistics can't run on wishful thinking. A few heads nodded before the chairman even asked for comments. I tried to speak, voice steady but quiet. The data! The chairman lifted his gavel and tapped it once sharp. Mr. Mercer, let your brother finish. The wood-on-wood crack silenced me more than a shout could have. On the wall behind Michael, the projector flickered to a new image, a leaked memo half a paragraph cut off, highlighted to suggest I'd approved an overrun. The context gone, the damage clear. Gasps slipped from the audience. Phones lit up. A reporter whispered into her mic. Internal scandal costs ballooning. I caught the glow of my own phone at the edge of the table. Notifications rolled in links. Comments, headlines already forming. Mercer mishandles contract. Dropout officer fails again. My father shifted in his chair, jaw tight. When he finally looked up, he shook his head once slow as if to confirm what the room already believed. The livestream screen in the corner showed me sitting still, expression plain. A split-second delay let me watch myself lose. I heard the shuffle of shoes, the rustle of jackets, the cough of someone waiting for the conclusion. Michael's voice pressed harder, smooth as glass. We need leadership that commands confidence, not excuses. For the sake of shareholders and staff alike, this is non-negotiable. The murmurs spread. Even Earl, the old commander who had wandered in, looked down at his hands, unwilling to meet my eyes. My palms sweated against the table's edge. I wanted to lift the notebook Gaines had given me, wave the pages, let the ink speak. But the timing wasn't mine. Instead, I looked at my phone again. The countdown clock glowed small but certain 001:12. Each digit blinked in rhythm with the pulse in my wrist. Resolution felt gone. The contract lost the name stained. My father leaned back, folding his arms, verdict delivered in body language. I inhaled the sterile chill of recycled air, the scent of floor polish sharp in my nose, and sat straighter anyway. The gavel tapped again. That will conclude testimony. The chairman's voice blurred in my ears. Then my phone vibrated a faint hum against the oak table. The timer had run out. Phones began chiming like a flock of small bells. One, then another, then an electrical chorus that rolled across the room and up into the rafters. Screens flashed, tabs opened themselves in a jittery mosaic, subject lines cloning evidence packet scheduled. The chairman paused mid-sentence, gavel lifted but undecided. A red light on the live-stream camera blinked faster as if it too had a pulse. On the projector, my email body filled the wall dates times sign-offs. Attachments stacked along the bottom like cartridge slots. Someone clicked the first a receipt with a vendor code and a signature that wasn't mine. The ink so dark the pen had bitten the paper. Another Slack logs time-stamped where expedite had meant ignore the safety margin. Then the video, a grainy security clip with a timestamp steady as a metronome. Michael leaning toward a vendor in the loading corridor, a white envelope passed palm to palm. No melodrama, only the lightest bump of shoulders afterward, like men congratulating themselves for speed. A murmur rose, not outrage yet, but the sound of a hallway flooding. The chairman finally brought the gavel down once, twice. The crack ricocheted off polished wood and varnished walls. "Order," he said. His voice sounded smaller than the microphone's. I didn't speak. The patch in my pocket had a rough ridge where the seam had frayed, and I rubbed it with my thumb, the way you might rub a worry stone, except this one had already taken its hit. At home, a needle waited in a dish beside my keys. Tonight, I told myself, even if my hands shook. The doors at the back of the hall opened. General Gaines walked in at an ordinary pace which somehow settled the air more than a march would have. He did not look left or right, just up at the screen where the clip looped, then down at the table where the board members sat with their pens and their postures. His civilian jacket could not make him smaller. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, not loud, but engineered to carry. "You've heard accusations. You're now seeing records." He glanced at the chairman. "You have the board's decision." The counsel at the end of the table, gray hair, neat glasses, cleared his throat and slid a folder across the wood. A blue ribbon seal winked under the lights. The notary's red stamp looked like a small wound. "Read it," the general said. The counsel lifted the paper eyes, skimming breath, steadying against the microphone hiss. Effective immediately, he read the board reinstates Mr. Elias Mercer to operational authority, as previously defined in Bylaw 44.2, with mandate to audit and correct logistics lanes impacted by contract variance. Prior reassignments are void. His voice strengthened as he went, as if the language was building a floor beneath his shoes. We further open an inquiry into procurement irregularities as documented in the attached exhibits A through M. Cameras popped a polite staccato. I could see the live stream window in the corner again, this time lagging on the council's mouth, forming the words reinstates and void. The word void landed in my ribs like a cool hand. Michael's face emptied, then tried to refill itself with disbelief. He glanced toward our father, who had drawn back as if heat had licked his knees. Frank stared at the paper eyes, searching for a line that would let him keep what he'd said about me. None arrived. Gaines took a step forward. "Mercer." He said my name, a simple thing correctly weighted. I rose. The chair legs whispered against the floor. The patch lay rough in my palm. I curled my fingers around it as if closing a circuit. "Sir," I said. He didn't reach for the microphone. He simply stood beside me and saluted, crisp, unhurried, precise. The hall seemed to inhale. It wasn't thunder. It was weather changing. One row of uniforms rose, then the next, like wheat in a disciplined wind, until the room was vertical and still. Applause followed, not wild, not performative, just inevitable, like rain that has been on the radar all afternoon and finally arrives. My mouth was dry. I didn't need to wet it. The moment wasn't asking me for words. A staffer in a dark suit approached the table with a small glass front case oak frame, hinges polished velvet, backing a shadow box they must have used 100 times for pins and patches and retirement coins. He placed it beside the council's folder and stepped back. Gaines glanced at the case, then at my hand. "Can you fix it?" he asked quietly, almost conversational, as if we were back by the bingo boards. "At home," I said. "Tonight." He reached into his own pocket, not the breast one where the notebook had come from, but lower, as if to say this was ordinary, and produced a small sewing kit, the kind that lives in a field bag. Forever 2 needles, a loop of black thread, 3 buttons. "We can start it now," he said. "So the glass has something to protect." I smiled without showing teeth. My hands didn't shake. I passed the frayed patch to him. He threaded the needle like a man who had fixed his own seams more than once. He pushed the point through the fabric and back just 2 tight stitches to pinch the fray enough to hold the line. Then he placed the patch in the case's velvet and closed the pane. The latch clicked a small, final sound. The council set the reinstatement document beside the case. A photographer leaned in. The flash bounced off the glass and made a square of light dance on the ceiling. The chairman, to his credit, stood too, now keeping his gavel still. "By the board's decision, the council said into the mic, operational command reverts to Mr. Mercer. This session will adjourn for transition." I looked at Michael. He had a question in his eyes that didn't have a word yet. How? Or since when? Or maybe just the first honest, what now of his life? He didn't say it out loud. Our father didn't either. His mouth opened, then closed like he'd reached for a story he'd told 1,000 times, and felt it dissolve under his hand. Applause rose again, the kind that has no center, only edges where it runs out of room and turns into quiet. Someone behind me sniffed varnish and warm bodies and the faint pepper of old uniforms. Gaines lowered his hand and nodded once more to the room, then to me. "Sir," I said, returning the salute, and for a strange second I felt both younger and older than 52. Younger because I recognized this formality as a door I'd waited behind, older because I knew doors are still just wood and hinges. They open, and your work walks through them with you. A reporter called a question that got lost under the scrape of chairs. The live stream ticker updated board reinstates operations lead. Inquiry opens. Someone cut the feed. The red light went dark, and the hall heard itself again. I took the shadow box in both hands. It had more weight than the patch ever had. Proof has a frame. Now I thought not a pocket. The glass showed a faint reflection of my face, and behind it, the blur of my father and brother still seated. If truth has mercy, it is that it doesn't gloat. Gaines touched my elbow, guiding me one step toward the aisle. "There's a transition brief," he murmured. "Then rest." I nodded. "I'll sew the rest tonight." He smiled with his eyes. "Paper speaks. So do stitches." We moved toward the side exit while small knots of conversation formed and broke around us. Outside the doors, the corridor smelled like copier toner and new carpet. The applause bled through thinner now, like a heartbeat heard through a sleeve. I balanced the case against my ribs, the cool glass steady under my fingertips. At the corner, I looked back. Michael was still staring, calculations stalled in his face like a watch with sand in it. My father had turned halfway in his chair as if someone had called his name. No one had. The question hung between them unclaimed. What now? I didn't try to answer it for them. The answer was in the case I carried, and in the paper on the table, and in the room we were leaving behind, finally lighter than when we entered. Rain tapped the window like a patient knuckle. It was the kind of January rain that laid a gray film over Houston and made the city sound muffled, as if someone had thrown a blanket over its engines. In the quiet, after applause rooms get heavier. My office carried the extra weight reinstatement packet open on my desk, a stack of route maps clipped with binder teeth, the shadow box with the patched watch set on the credenza catching a strand of winter light. The little black notebook sat beside my keyboard elastic strap unhooked. A page weighted date time, what I saw, what could be proved. The printer coughed once and held its breath. The overhead vent exhaled cool air on my wrist. Down the hall an elevator chimed, then didn't open, then chimed again. The city outside made the sound of tires on wet concrete. In the window's reflection, I looked like a man who had slept, and also like a man who hadn't. Both were true. A knock at the door, and Michael hovered in the gap, like steam that hadn't decided whether to leave. He didn't cross the threshold. A banker's box leaned against his calf, the kind with handholds stamped out. A plastic plant poked up out of it, a piece of office life you don't remember owning until you see it in transit. HR said to bring my access card, he said. His voice had lost its equalizer. Some frequencies were raw. He laid the card on the corner of my desk and lined it up with the edge, as if straightness could atone. I kept my hands on either side of the notebook. You'll need a receipt, I said, because process is a way to keep blood from flooding a scene. He nodded, then didn't move. Rain underlined the pause on the glass. He swallowed. I didn't think it would. He shut the door behind him as if privacy might supply the word. Get this far. I waited. Sometimes the hardest thing is not rescuing a sentence. He looked at the watch in the case, then back at me. You're going to want me gone, he said. It wasn't quite a question. What I want? I said, choosing each plank as I stepped on it as for the lanes to run clean, and for the board to finish its work. He nodded again one too many times. Right. He shifted the box. A framed photo slid inside and ticked the cardboard. I'll send over a handoff. The good pieces should still be used. There were good pieces even there. A quiet fact. Send it, I said. He looked like he had lined up another speech and then abandoned it. When he finally reached for the handle, I heard the plant's leaves whisper against the cardboard empty papery. Eli, he said without turning, I don't know how to make this right. You start by not making it worse, I said. It came out less sharp than I expected, and by telling the truth whenever it asks for you. He nodded, eyes closed once, a long blink that might have been a flinch. Then he went shoes whispering on the carpet elevator, chiming for him at the proper time. I sat until my pulse ticked down. Then I wrote in the notebook handoff promised by noon, use what's clean. The act of writing steadied the air. Another knock. Then the door swung wider without ceremony. Gaines filled the frame, rain freckles on his jacket shoulders like salt. He closed the door with the soft click of a man who has closed a lot of doors and never used the slam. You look like the weather, he said. Wet? I asked. Earnest, he said, mouth almost smiling. He set a paper bag on the desk, a diner sandwich wrapped in wax, and took the guest chair as if it were the one he'd always used. How's the room? Heavier, I said. It does that, he said. He tapped the notebook with one finger. You keeping the ledger, best I can. He leaned back, considering the shadow box. Good stitches, he said. You finished it clean. I touched the glass with 2 fingers. It doesn't shake. Neither do you, he said. He let the words sit. Tell me the worst and the best since yesterday. Worst, I'm angry, I said. The confession surprised me by being small and accurate like a label you finally peel off. And it wants to do the talking. And the best, I'm not letting it, I said. He nodded as if ticking a box on an invisible form. Don't let silence harden Eli. Let it guide. He leaned forward. Hardened silence is grudge. Guided silence is discipline. Outside, a siren Dopplered past and thinned out. The printer woke, made a grinding sound, then spit 1 page with a crease down the middle. I flattened it with the side of my hand. Michael, he asked. Stripped of the lead, I said. Brought his card. Said he'd send a handoff. That's a useful sentence, Gaines said. Hold him to it and let the inquiry do its job. He stood, then didn't go. Your father? I looked at the phone. A text had landed during Michael's visit and sat unopened. Didn't know it said in the preview. Proud of you, kid. No punctuation. It carried 30 years of punctuation inside it. He reached out, I said. And you, I'm deciding what kind of silence to keep, I said. Gaines took that in and let it be. He picked up the bag and handed it back to me. Eat, he said, then get to work. Then go home. When he left, the room fluttered back to its previous shape, but not all the way. I unwrapped the sandwich and ate half without tasting much beyond mustard and warm bread. Then I turned to the stack root's margins, the lane through Galveston that had looked cheap under a fluorescent bulb and expensive under daylight. I made notes, crossed out shortcuts, built a plan that didn't perform, only worked. By mid-afternoon, the rain had gone thin. A reply from Michael hit my inbox, a link to a folder titled Handoff Clean Lines. Inside were 3 spreadsheets and 1 apology hiding in a file name revised actuals/final, really, XLSX. I smiled without showing teeth and opened what could be used. The phone vibrated again, a different tone calendar. Community Logistics Workshop Interest Meeting, Wharton, CC. The invite had come from Earl's ancient email address and was CC'd to Gaines and half the county school counselor, a church deacon, the librarian with the stern bun. Description: teens and vets. Teach lanes, not legends. I leaned back. The shadow box caught the light again, a small sun in oak. Forgiveness, I realized, is not the same as memory loss. It's deciding which part of the story you'll carry forward and which part you'll put on a shelf behind glass so it can teach without bleeding. I picked up the phone and opened my father's text. Didn't know. Proud of you, kid, I typed, then erased. I tried again. We'll talk soon. I'm working on lanes. It wasn't eloquent. It was true. I hit send and felt the room let out a breath I hadn't noticed it was holding. At 5, the building was quiet, the way offices get quiet when rain has washed most people out early. I shut down the screen, slid the notebook into my inside pocket, and lifted the shadow box for a second to feel its weight. Paper speaks. Stitches hold. Some days that's all a man needs to walk upright into the hallway. The elevator opened when I pressed the button. On the way down, the lights flickered. Once reconsidered, stayed on. In the lobby, the glass doors breathed a evening damp into the marble. I pushed into it and felt the cool air erase the office's varnish. The invite still glowed in my phone's corner. I tapped accept. Outside, the rain had become a fine lace that didn't quite touch the ground. The city made a quieter sound. I headed toward the garage, the notebook warm against my ribs, thinking about a gym floor in Wharton, a circle of folding chairs, and a whiteboard that didn't have anyone's name boxed out. The ribbon arced down with a snip red fabric, curling like a flag at rest. Applause lifted under the bright spring sun, cicadas already trying their chorus, though morning wasn't far along. The Wharton Community Center smelled of fresh paint and barbecue smoke drifting from the parking lot. Inside, folding chairs lined up straighter than pews. On a long table draped with blue cloth sat the shadow box oak frame glass front, the old watch centered against velvet. Children pressed fingerprints to the glass, whispering to each other, testing if the tick was real. I carried the scissors back to the podium, Gaines at my shoulder. He looked less like a general today, more like a neighbor who knew how to square a beam. Michael stood by the refreshment table, sleeves rolled, pouring cups of lemonade for teenagers who didn't know his name from the news. Frank had taken a chair in the second row, his hands on his knees. When the crowd clapped again, he added his 2 palms, soft but present. I cleared my throat. Some careers are built in noise, I said, words steady as if written on lined paper. Some in silence. Silence doesn't mean absence. It means patience. The kids in the front row leaned forward. Behind them, townspeople nodded, as if each word had found a shelf they'd been saving. Michael set down the pitcher and raised a hand to help stack paper cups when one toppled. It wasn't dramatic, just quiet service, but I caught it and let it stand as its own sentence. My father looked at him, then at me, then back at the watch. His clapping the second time was louder, almost certain. Applause spread not wild, but warm. No bravado, no headlines waiting to twist it. Only neighbors, students, veterans, and one patched watch in a case earning its keep. I set my notes down and let the sound carry itself. Later, when the hall emptied and chairs scraped into stacks, I slipped outside. The cicadas had found full volume now, their racket so steady it felt like silence turned inside out. I sat on the low brick ledge tie, loosened air heavy with cut grass and mesquite smoke. For once, nothing waited to be proved. I listened until the noise became weather, then leaned back and let the quiet do the rest. The clink of cups and plates carried from the fellowship hall a softer applause than the one that had greeted the ribbon's fall. I rested a hand on the glass of the watch case, the repaired seam smooth now, the tick steady beneath velvet. It reminded me that justice, when earned, quietly holds longer than noise. I had wanted revenge once, but restoration proved heavier, the kind you can share without shame. A church bulletin on the corkboard already announced next month's workshop, proof that silence can seed something larger. What small repair waits on your table today